Um, no, it's my pleasure to work alongside ESI and Smart Spaces. I have worked alongside them for a couple decades. Actually worked here for a period of time. I'm Carol Sicey. I'm the Regional Sales Director for Miller Knoll now. That's a whole new situation, right? But it's our pleasure to work alongside you guys. We're so excited for Victor. We are so excited about Smart Spaces. What a great investment. And it's Herman Miller dealer. Our newest Herman Miller dealer. But we're also excited because we have a gentleman here who I've been friends with for a long time. We Ryan Anderson is our VP of Global Insights. All of the research arm that Herman Miller has goes right up into what Ryan is going to talk about today. He's got a team. We're excited. You're expanding your team. We're excited about that. And we spend a lot of time talking to customers about what healthcare, standard workplace looks like. And Ryan's going to speak about that today. So with that,
awesome, thank you. I'm going to try to use the mic, although is this too loud? Like, should I ditch the mic? I think there's people, at least in theory, in other rooms in the building that can hear me better if I use the mic. But I am so happy to be with you. I'm keenly aware of the fact that you were drinking. Now you're sitting listening to me, and you'll be drinking later. So I'm going to try to keep this interesting. And actually, this is a topic that I personally find really interesting, which is I want to unpack a little bit how technology has impacted workplace and how we might be more prepared in the future to think about its future impact. I won't be getting into specific technologies demonstrated here, but you'll definitely see the connection. And I will probably go for about 30 minutes and then completely open Q&A. As Carol mentioned, I have a team of global researchers. We look at everything from future of work and workplace to future of home life to any number of topics. And if you've got questions about offices, working from home, any of it, if I know the answer, I'll answer it for you. If not, I'll find you the answer. But I want to make sure the time is useful for you. A little bit of background. Oh, I forgot I put a slide in here. Hey, let's understand how technology is impacting the workplace and how to harness its potential to improve workplace experience, which is what I will always harken back to. The technology is interesting, but it's only useful if it makes somebody's life better. And sometimes that's definitely happening. Sometimes it's not. A little bit of background about research at Miller now. As Carol said, I now, like her, am part of Miller Knoll, the new parent company that oversees Herman Miller and 18 other brands. And so we'll be doing this across all of those organizations. But from here on out, I'm really going to be talking to you a little bit more about what we've done at Herman Miller. We started looking at future of work and workplace formally in 1960. I'm continuing the tradition. We always take a look at people, process, place in that order. Who are we helping? What are they doing? Where? We don't start with a where, because the where sometimes is multiple answers. Like if we're going to support people working, it's not just going to be in an office. Like last year, we looked at supporting work at home, supporting work in the office, co-working. We even did a little collaboration with Nissan, checking out a concept vehicle, a Nissan Caravan that was shown at the Tokyo Auto Salon around nomadic working, like get in the car and just be free and work wherever you want. And it's fun because the more we look at those situations, the more we have a clearer sense of how to support work elsewhere. But as part of this process bucket, technology and technology research has been part of what Herman Miller has been researching since 1968. Specifically, it started with an event known as the mother of all demos. Now, before I show you some slides on this, I'll tell you a quick funny anecdote. I came over to Herman Miller in 2012. My job was to lead technology research because that was a role, Director of Future Technology. Our PR person at the time, his name was Mark, and he left me a voicemail, and it said this: Ryan, it's Mark from PR. Stanford called me, and they're doing a musical, and they need your help. Call me back. And I listened to that voicemail like 4 times. That is the weirdest voicemail. I didn't know anything about this, but there was a really important event in the tech world at Stanford in, oh crud, look at that. I forgot what slides I put in here. This was me 3 minutes ago. There's the concept vehicle on the right. There was a really important event in 1968 called the Mother of All Demos. It was where Stanford showed the world the first personal computer. Anybody seen the movie Hidden Figures? Wonderful movie about African-American women at NASA in 1968. Their job title, computer. If you computed, you were a computer. And it was about when NASA got their first mainframe. So same year, Stanford's already thinking, I think everybody's going to use one of these things. Let's show the world what it might look like. And they happened to have a relationship with Herman Miller's research team, and Herman Miller designed the first work environment for the first personal computer. So the first mouse pad for the first mouse, the first monitor arm for the first monitor. And it was a really impactful event for the Herman Miller research team. In fact, one person in particular, his name is Jack Kelly. He's still around. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He lives a little bit closer to the lake shore, but he was Herman Miller's lead person, and he was working with this guy, Doug Engelbart, who invented the first mouse, and the team at Stanford. And he walked into the room, and there was a keyboard built into the side of this mainframe, and then they kind of showed this mouse being used somewhere else. And Jack said, can you take that keyboard off the mainframe and put it in front of the person like a typewriter? Which is how they decided to detach the keyboard and essentially make what became like this little structure. Now, interestingly, Jack had to attach it to a Eames fiberglass chair because we hadn't invented ergonomic chairs yet. So the team, after getting into this, said, if people are really going to sit at these things for a while, we're going to need a better chair. And so in 1976, they released Ergon, the first ergonomic chair. Jack went on later to create a product called EvoSpace, which was the first product to really heavily distribute cabling. It's been a part of what we do for a really long time. And I've been fascinated by the topic of technology and how it changes the way we work. And the last couple of years, it's been really pronounced because people's patterns have changed so much. One of the things we've learned over the years is a little bit about how the pace of technological change impacts buildings. And there's a cliche that technology changes so fast that we can't predict its impact, which we've determined is totally wrong. And to support me, I'm using a framework from the world's probably best technology research firm named Gartner. Those who are with the tech world will know this. This is what they call their hype cycle. And if you Google Gartner hype cycle, you'll see every year they release this list of trends. I've taken all of the dots off, and it'll say all of the technologies that are at different phases of their lifespan. It takes about 10 to 15 years to work through this, but I love the phases. First phase, technology trigger. Somebody invented something. It means it's technologically possible. You might see something on YouTube, something crazy that somebody did. And then when people get really excited about it, they called it the peak of inflated expectations, where people think this is going to change the world. But check out the next phase, the trough of disillusionment. I don't know who, for a tech research firm, they got a little kitschy here with the phrasing, but basically it takes a long time to commercialize a technology to the point where it actually makes a difference in the world. And this is where people are like, I don't know whatever happened to that. I live in Grand Rapids. We have the longest, most complex autonomous vehicle route in the world in Grand Rapids right now. I'm on the Mobility Commission. We've had it going for a year and a half. If you come to Grand Rapids, Michigan, you can jump in a self-driving car or ride around downtown for free. But the reason why it's taking so long, because I remember hearing about autonomous vehicles living in Michigan 10 years ago, is it's incredibly complicated. Make sure that if they get into an accident, that some engineers worked out all this stuff, and it's really a 20-year, 30-year kind of trajectory. But when things start to get better, you're on the slope of enlightenment and ultimately the plateau of productivity. When I took over Herman Miller's technology research, VR, virtual reality, and AR were right here and here. And at that point, this was 2012, they were already 24 years old, I think. So these things aren't really new. What blindsides people is they don't see what's here. So part of our job is just to know, like, what's on the horizon, what's likely going to impact people. We started our work, as an example, on desktop video, Skype, Teams, Zoom, et cetera, through a partnership with the head of user experience at Microsoft in 2012. In 2012, I had a bunch of PVC pipes and drapes in my basement, creating a video booth at home. My wife was legitimately concerned, by the way. She's like, I don't understand what you're doing down there. But we were looking at lighting, acoustics. I used some acoustical fabric from the healthcare world, see if I could affect the environment. So it's just our job to stay ahead of this, basically. All right, so let's ask this question. Why is it that we work the way we work? Why do offices, as we know them, why are they designed certain ways, and are they in fact reflective of the ways that we are working? I'm not going to take you super down this path, but I am kind of a history geek. I find it's much more interesting to look at the future if you know the past. This is essentially how offices started. The upper left. They were adjacent to manufacturing facilities and other places. It was all men working literally in white collars. The clerks all wore white collars, which is where we get white collar work. It was a row of desks. If I look down here, this is probably about 1914, 1915. The one on the bottom is 30s. Basically the same, except that now we've got a supervisor overseeing the people who are doing their work, and they did all their work right there. And then the upper right, this is post-World War II in Germany, because there was this movement known as Bürolandschaft, which is office landscape. And the idea was, it's basically the origins of open office. Let's make it a landscape. People can move through it. They can do a variety of different things. It should look different visually. It shouldn't be so uniform. It should be like a cityscape, basically. And Herman Miller designed Action Office, which is what we use in the mother of all demos in 1964, largely to deliver on that. But things went awry because we got this. This is because of what we talked about a few minutes ago, desktop computers. So when the team originally looked at desktop computing, they did not realize that virtually all of a person's work might be done. They had already looked at technologies that were part of a person's workday, but not to the point where it tethered them. I entered the industry in '94. I was kind of horrified to realize that the way most office spaces were designed was to understand where the monitors went, take a corner work surface, build out it around them, and then the laying out of panels, which were meant to be modular and flexible, were really pathways for power and data. And the data essentially tied all that stuff together. And so it's not an exaggeration to say that spaces for 30 years were designed around IT networks, not people networks. They really were. We don't like to say that, but it was true. By the way, many of us made a whole lot of money, not me necessarily, but it was a good equation. Like if a company hired 200 people, well, they'd need 200 computers, 200 desk phones, 200 desk chairs, and 200 desks, and the industry grew, but it wasn't good. I mean, it kind of evoked a lot of today's assumptions because people had such limited autonomy. And so let's look at our assumptions about how work has been done the last 20 years. Work happens in the office. Well, it had to. And not just because of cubicles, but really from the origins of the office. Managers oversee work and workers. Literally, they oversee it visually. People do individual work at their desks. The more important you are, the better space you get. Count the ceiling tiles. How important are you? Team-based work, that's done in conference rooms. Socialization, that's for your break time or cigarettes. You need permission to telecommute, and video is about connecting groups and rooms. And we went into the pandemic with these assumptions. Now, were they still true? No. They started to change before that. And it really happened around 2005, 2006. So I used to work in the merchandise mart in Chicago. I remember some of the salespeople I worked with got cordless handsets for their phone. And there was this guy named Dennis who was an old curmudgeon. He had a full suit on, and he used to take his handset and he'd walk and he'd talk. It's kind of like when you see this in the airport. Oh, I know the camera can't catch me here. And he'd walk and he would pace because that's as far as the phone would let him go. So I'd watch Dennis do this because he was using the limited autonomy he could get. And then when Wi-Fi rolled around, we started to hear more and more stories about people not working from their workstations, not working from their cubicles. For me, this was around 2005, 2006. And if you look at the adoption of computers for our homes, the availability of Wi-Fi, basically the work started to spread out around that era. That, by the way, is known as distributed working, the spreading out of work, which is by far the most important trend we can all talk about. More important than hybrid or remote, et cetera. The spreading out of work is a 15 to 20-year thing. Now I'm once again ahead of my slides. So despite the rise of distributed working, there was still like this super binary view of offices. Organizations would say you're an office worker or you're a telecommuter or a remote worker. Telecommuter to me sounds like a really old term now. But the idea was if you're an office worker, you do your work in the office. If you're a telecommuter, you do all your work outside of the office. That really is not exactly what was taking shape between 2000 and 2020. Offices continued to grow in this approach where they were planned with dense amount of desks, just rows of generic desks, because of the assumption that everybody who's an office worker needs one, and that's where they do their work. We've been using sensors with customers for 14 years now. I can show you data from 2009 to 2019 that shows a year-over-year decline in desk utilization. Why? Distributed working. People were just working elsewhere. They're working from the cafe, they're working from their home, they're working from the coffee shop, the supplier, the airplane, the hotel room. It was happening. Nobody just really stopped to think about it. Well, at least not a lot of people. And then 2020 happened, and we saw this massive pendulum swing. Harvard Business Review published a piece maybe July of 2020 that said that 14% of managers thought remote work was sustainable at the beginning of the pandemic in March. By June, it had swung up to like 42%. By October, I was getting calls, do we need offices? And I'd say, well, you've been cooking from home the last 6 months. Do we need restaurants? And people would smile and they'd say, well, it's different. I say, I know it's different because you love going to restaurants, but I don't think you love going to your office if I'm reading you right. Yeah, well, okay, then we need better offices. But by January or February, it was kind of like, okay, working from home is not a panacea either. Let's figure out a flexible model. And they landed essentially on this idea of hybrid. And the words can get in the way, but hybrid is essentially one way of supporting distributed working. It's not the only way. But the top of your conversation since then, throughout 2021, has really been around flexibility. And I know this is a talk about technology, but I think it's useful to get into a little bit of this. Herman Miller is a founding partner of Future Forum, which is a collaboration started by Slack, but it also includes Boston Consulting Group and Management Leadership for Tomorrow. And we've been looking at flexible working, the adoption of technology, digital transformation, office strategy together. We do an index of 10,000 people we survey every quarter. We've been doing interviews with executives around the world. It's interesting. Yes, 76% of people want more flexibility with where they can work. 93% want more flexibility with when they can work. So the media might characterize it as a pushback against the office, but we find that a majority of people still want access to an office. What they don't want is the traditional work week. And that flexibility is important, that whether you're a caregiver of some form or you've got a physical, sensory, or cognitive limitation, there's just a variety of reasons why you might want differences in where and when you work. Interestingly, human resource leaders have jumped into this conversation, which for me has been the single biggest change last year of anything I've seen in more than 25 years. And it's great. The questions they're asking are excellent. They're very people-centered, as you could imagine. So what we're seeing is basically three strategies. And this is an oversimplification. I could probably break this down to a dozen, but you've got organizations that are office first. Most work for most people will be done in the office. It can be done very successfully. Having said that, they're going to be competing with organizations that provide more flexibility. So it better be good. Then on the other side, there's remote first. Small percentage of the overall market, 4 or 5%, but these are organizations that say that working from home is the primary location for most people. They can save a fair amount of their corporate real estate costs. As a result, they invest it in working from home. Most of them are tech companies. Most of them are doing it to go snag your best talent from anywhere around the world. So this would be Shopify, Dropbox, Spotify, Vistaprint. There's a few others. But a majority are landing on hybrid. And in fact, we felt like it's right around 60 to 70%. Ernst & Young released a report last week saying it's about 75%. But the idea of hybrid is not just that some time is spent in the office and some time is spent at home. The idea of hybrid is we're giving the employees choice, and then we're giving them good choices. Choice is operative. It's about giving them more control over their work experience, not just telling them not to be in the office a certain amount of time, because that just means you'll have poorly utilized offices a certain amount of the time. And it's complicated, but it feels like it's workable. And there are organizations that have supported it well for a long time. One of the reasons why hybrid feels like it's really beginning to gain traction is because HR leaders, among others, realize that it's a path towards more equitable experiences. Not equal experiences, but equitable experiences, meaning there's any number of things that might cause someone to be more productive in one place or another on a given day. It might be your job function, but add to it 100 other reasons. It's your, as I mentioned, your cognitive or sensory abilities. It's the work you're doing. It's your relationship with your spouse. It's your Wi-Fi. It's the dog. It's the Amazon delivery person. It's any number of things. Yesterday, we hosted we do webinars every other week, by the way. We hosted several hundred people around the world talking about a topic that is not very common, but we discussed the impact of menopause on the workforce. About 10% of women menopausal age will leave the workforce. at prime time in their careers, right when they're ready to take on additional leadership responsibilities because they're experiencing a variety of issues, not just hot flashes. Believe it or not, giving people more flexibility with where they can work, when they can work, can address a whole host of things. There's literally hundreds of facets. The idea here is give people enough choice and the right choices to let them be successful. It doesn't mean chaos. It's freedom within a framework. It's a certain number of things. And it doesn't mean that they're not on the hook to be responsible for being productive and, to whom much is given, much is expected. If you got more autonomy, it's up to you to make sure you meet your goals. But this is what's taking shape. And as a result, work is happening in a variety of areas. A lot of organizations are not thinking of their workplace synonymous with corporate office anymore. It's a lot of different areas. And of course, technology plays an absolutely critical role in that. So that was basically background. What I want to do is transition a little bit into thinking about how we can think about technology in the context of this. And then I'll open myself up to any questions or thoughts that you might have. Part of the goal here is to think about these options for where people work not as redundant or substitutionary, but as complementary. Meaning, where should video calls be supported? Office or home? Both. Where should heads down work be supported? Probably both. That doesn't mean that you have to fully plan them and be completely redundant. It's more like a Venn diagram. And like I said before, the more you understand all the different places where people can work, the more that you can tune one space to be more valuable in certain situations. Now, I'm not going to get super into it today, but you will find that these three things at the bottom are what we've been hitting hard as far as what to do with offices. Focus on community, because in a world of Zoom, individual teams are tight. Sociologists call those strong ties. Our immediate work teams, we know each other's pets' names. We're tight. Relationships between teams, what are known as weak ties, are weak. That's where we get a sense of belonging. That's where we get a sense of community. And if you want to do any sort of innovation at scale, not within a team, but across teams, this needs attention. So you'll see it here. There's places to reconnect, feel like you're part of something. That's important. The second thing is more immersive team time. What I mean by that is video is great for an hour. You want to spend 2 days with somebody? Don't schedule on video. You want to spend 3 hours with somebody? Don't schedule on video. So those strong ties might be really close, but if you want to spend quality time with a team, video is not a great option. I didn't mention it before, but we started studying remote first companies in like 2013. They still get their people together all the time. It's not like they don't get together. They just might not have traditional offices. So finding times to be really close, whether this is project team rooms or neighborhoods, there's a variety of ways to do it. And then interestingly, there's still a real need for individual focused and concentrative time. We have a work from home tool, wfh.hermanmiller.com. 22,000 people have used it around the world. The number one thing people say they struggle with is consistent focused concentration at home. You can do it sometimes, but then, you got Wi-Fi issues, you got the dog barking, you got kids, got the spouse on a Zoom call, whatever. So people still need to know if they come into the office and it's like, hey, everybody, that I can then peel away from you for a solid 2 hours to get into a spreadsheet. So when we start doing this, it provides a more clear purpose for the office and moves us away from a sea of generic desks and conference rooms that are not particularly good at any particular work activity towards something that's a bit more purposeful. Okay. This is where I might stop speaking quite so quickly. Looking forward at the impact technology and vice versa, what are some things to keep in mind? This is not the result of an exhaustive report. This is, as I thought about this a couple weeks ago, what I would tell a friend over a beer if I were talking about this topic. The first is, if the relationship between facilities and real estate and IT and HR wasn't communicative before, it needs to be now. Because what we're talking about is supporting people's work. And that means that the physical facets, the technological facets, and the policy, there needs to be more of an understanding than there once was. And it should be longer term. So I've seen situations where IT and facilities, as an example, might get together because there's a space redo and they start talking about where's the core drill and what kind of speakers do you need. Ideally, start talking way before that, because the two domains are very different and the terminology could not be more different. First of all, like on the bottom, I began just listing terms that mean something totally different in each. Architecture, design, desktop, Windows, security. IT world stole a bunch of terms from the physical workplace world, and now we're beginning to steal it back. Things like digital twins. But also, there's some other concepts that might be good to get out there. So like when an IT person talks about a stack, They're talking about like a series of technologies. They're not talking about a stack diagram as an architect would, that layer on top of one another to accomplish a certain thing. So room booking. It might be that you've got a Crestron piece of hardware running some software that integrates with Exchange or Google Calendar. That's the stack. Dog fooding. Anybody know what dog fooding is? Dog fooding is the technology term for basically, they could say, eating your own dog food, meaning using your own product, trying your own product, pushing the boundaries. If you haven't talked to your IT people at your company, chances are they're dog fooding something. They're trying something in a back room that they're going to try to give to everybody. And if you don't know what it is, how do you know how to prepare for it? Salesforce says they drink their own champagne, not eat their own dog food because they're fancy. This is my favorite, shadow IT. Anybody know what shadow IT is? Well, chances are you're shadow IT. Shadow IT is people that make IT-related decisions in an organization that aren't IT. Number one culprit last few years, real estate, who are installing sensors on lighting, installing room booking systems, installing internet-connected water coolers, space utilization sensors, all without including IT, which is a concern because it's a security concern. And nobody, well, there's another one, by the way, security. Security in IT and security in physical workspace are somewhat related, but it's important that these functions begin to just get to know each other. So I know it's weird, but even just reaching out to somebody and saying, hey, can we just talk? And maybe starting with the question, how are you thinking about supporting work differently would be good. Because IT was getting more involved in facilities and real estate. And then when the pandemic happened, all their digital transformation work took off and it pulled them far away from physical workplace. To the point where many were like, why should I worry about the building? I got 6,000 people trying to use Zoom for the first time. I get it. And it's been interesting because they were getting closer. Now they're getting a little bit farther apart. We need to bring them back. As I mentioned, consider how to support the full continuum of workplace. IT people have always been pretty good about supporting work wherever it happens. Facilities and real estate, less so. We've traditionally thought about it as corporate office. What does that mean? It might mean supporting some things from home. It might mean providing access to co-working. The federal government just signed a contract with 5 co-working providers so that all federal employees can go to work from a co-working space. But in doing that, you'll have the experience that we've been fortunate to have, which is thinking about that continuum of work and having a little bit clearer sense of where certain work activities need to happen. This is a big one. Return to office really shouldn't mean a reversal in digital transformation. And what I mean by that is if your organization adopted Slack or adopted Teams or adopted Zoom, content and conversation moved to the cloud. And that's not a bad thing. It shouldn't solely be there, but if opening up offices means that content is now on a whiteboard, physical whiteboard or a piece of foam core, and anybody not in the office can't see it, or if the decisions are now made in the hallway after the meeting instead of on the meeting, you've marginalized people. You've cut them off from the work. And so I know this is weird to think about, but the physical space is actually an interface into the technologies we use to access the work. Some people are using this term phygital, which is a really weird word, to suggest that work is both physical and digital simultaneously. I don't think about it that way. The work's become digitized, but we're always somewhere. And either that space supports us doing the work with the tools or it doesn't. And when you walk around here, you'll see this. You'll see that this space is designed to enable people to work using very advanced technologies without reversing the digital transformation journey. And I think this is probably one of those topics that could cause some issues between IT and facilities leaders in the future. I should put in a little bit of a plug. I think tomorrow on the Herman Miller Future of Work Hub, which is literally just hermanmiller.com/future of work, we're releasing about a dozen thought starters on how to take existing facilities and tweak them or improve them for post-pandemic work. One of them is a look at how to take a more traditional meeting room and make it better for those organizations that have adopted digital whiteboarding tools like Mural and Miro. And that may or may not be your organization, but it'll be interesting if you check it out just to see how that looks a little bit different than maybe a room that was once dominated with physical whiteboards. And there's still room for physical whiteboards, don't get me wrong. It's just that we can't provide them as the only option. CRE tech, have you heard that term? CRE tech is corporate real estate tech. It is a subset of a topic called prop tech. I'm giving you all sorts of words here. Prop tech is like a heavy conversation in the tech world. It's any technology that relates to property. And there are venture capital firms that focus on prop tech. There are prop tech conferences around the world, particularly in New York, Amsterdam, and London. Those are kind of the epicenters. Prop tech really refers to any technology that's drastically changing how we use, procure, design, manage space. It could be drones used for building inspections. It could be automated lease transactions. CRE tech is a subset that really gets to what's in the building. And whether you knew it or not, you're getting a little bit of a deep dive today in CRE tech. It should be part of the chart of work for the real estate, facilities, and IT team. I did a keynote at an IT conference 2 weeks ago. Same slide to the CIOs. This needs to be part of your chart of work. Do you know that buildings are becoming digitized? Do you know that there's all sorts of interesting data that buildings are producing? Do you know that there are these ideas called digital twins where the data may in fact move into something that feels like a Revit file, but you use it to manage the building over time, not just to construct it? This is all happening, and it's happening at a pretty good clip. It's not at the beginning of the hype cycle. We have a podcast called Looking Forward, Herman Miller does. You can find it on that page. One of the people I interviewed was Dr. Andrea Chagou, who leads Real Estate Innovation Lab at MIT. And one of my questions for her is, how far off is this stuff? And she said, it's not that far off. We should be talking about this now. That doesn't mean you have to go completely transform the facility tomorrow. Start playing, start prototyping, see how this stuff works. And in particular, the topic of data and data-driven building management and design is a heady one, but it's worth getting to know. Examples of CRE tech: space scheduling, utilization tracking, energy management, workplace experience apps. The energy management and air quality one I think is hot right now, measuring CO2 levels in buildings. There are parents sending their kids to school with CO2 monitors because COVID taught them that indoor air quality is critical to our health. CO2 also is correlated with our productivity. Higher levels of CO2, lower levels of cognition. That's not a crackpot theory. That particular reference is from Yale. So manage those CO2 levels. Smart energy management systems are one way to do it. Share is the key, though. Video. We need to think a little bit about supporting video differently in the office. Yes, we should go equip rooms. And that is important because people need to feel like if they go into a meeting room and they're talking and they realize somebody else should be in the conversation, that they can add them. Having said that, we need to talk about the support of individual video as well. So when I was doing that collaboration with Skype back in 2012, I went to Building 5 at Microsoft. There was a meeting with about 16 of us. There were 3 of us in the room. And I said to Tom, the head of user experience, where is everyone? And he said, they're at their desk. And in 2012, that was weird to me. Like, they're not coming to the room, they're just at their desks. And he said, well, we designed the user interface for individual use. And it hit me like a truck. I'm like, video conferencing, as I knew it, was room to room. And it was group to group. He was saying that this is for individuals. We can make it work in a room, but everybody's got their box. Brady Bunch. Who wants to be one of 4 stuffed into one of those boxes? Tiny little head, far away from the microphone. So I've already seen it. We're going to find more and more people trying to take video from their desk, from a booth, from other areas where they need opacity behind them. Cameras should not be pointed at glass. They should be pointed at something solid. Lighting, basics, a surface. You've all done that thing where you try to stack the laptop up. Nobody goes around taking selfies of themselves like this because you look terrible. You want it like this because it eliminates the chins and the nose. So this is important, and I actually think it's one of the things that people will really appreciate if we do well. I'm getting a little bit geeky on you here with this one, but also we need to think a little bit about how, as the use of collaborative technologies mature, it isn't just about synchronous. So synchronous is everybody talking at the same time. Meetings. Everybody's videoed out. That whole 93% of people that want more flexibility with when, part of it is they're stuck on video meetings during dinner. And when people moved out of the office, a lot of them just said, whatever we did in the office will now be on video. And it's exhausting and it's bad for your health. I know Carol knows this. I was getting vertigo. By the way, I've worked in what we would call hybrid since 2014. I was getting vertigo from the amount of video meetings in 2020. I was not used to people scheduling me for 14 video meetings a day, but there were certain days when I had that. So the idea behind these, and it's one of the reasons why Microsoft went from Skype to Teams, and it's the reason why Slack and Zoom are so often paired up with one another, is that asynchronous means you contribute when you have a few minutes. So if we were to create like a PowerPoint together, or a Google Doc, or a Word doc, we wouldn't sit in a room and do it together. You'd start it, I'd add to it, you'd add to it, somebody had comments, and we'd finish it. It's asynchronous. This is how those processes will mature. So interesting but simple takeaway. expect that as teams become more collaborative while they're spread out, there's more of a demand for individual heads down space. I know that doesn't sound right, but that's one of the issues that people are having at home. I'm in a spreadsheet. I'm working on it with somebody else. I need 2 hours to understand what's here. And that's collaboration. Watch a student group, they don't get together to do all their work. So we need to solve this better. And then I'll end with this and then go to just open Q&A. Both the facilities and the IT world could benefit from piloting a little bit more. Like these, hey, we've landed on something, do a massive deployment is real risky. And often what I see is them doing it separately. And I think they'd be fine with this, but I'm going to take a risk on this. When the Skype team was working on a building 5, their workplace strategy team came and put benching everywhere. Well, guess what doesn't work really well in benching? Using individual video. And so there was kind of like this, why didn't we try this somewhere? And we saw this at a customer this morning. Turn the desk perpendicular. Same footprint, but now my camera is pointed at the screen behind me instead of out into the open circulation space. Simple stuff. So as you go around, you look at technologies, maybe ask the question, what does it look like to try this? You don't have to deploy it fully throughout the entire facility. Some people here might like it if you did, but piloting is a really good thing, and it's how we learn together. So I'll just mention that, we're here to help. My team, I have a group of researchers, but I also have a group of insight sharers. Like I said, we do webinars every other week. We've got the Future of Work Hub. We've got a podcast. But if you need individual help, let us know. If you want to pilot something or think about an actual project, we're here to help too. That's the hub. Okay. It is 4:45. I talked longer than I was supposed to, but we scheduled this for an hour. So if you're like, I could really use another drink and I've had enough of this, you won't insult me if you go. But I will take any questions you've got for the next 15 minutes on anything related to technology, office design, or anything else. Yes, sir.
So when the pandemic, when it started, I think a lot of people reacted just to get people working. What would you say in terms of like the percentage of people that are truly collaborating versus just executing and working? There's a definite difference, but I'm curious what, based on your research.
That is an excellent question. So yes, people are being productive. Are they really collaborating? This is a fiercely debated topic, actually. I think the best research indicates that people were more productive in their individual work working from home in 2020. Part of it was they were working really long hours and it was kind of a panic, but are they collaborating? My personal belief is yes. Collaboration isn't necessarily based on co-location. The best evidence suggests that the number one factor for good collaboration is psychological safety, being able to feel like you can speak your mind and tell people what you'd like. Now, having said that, as I mentioned, I'm concerned that it's micro collaboration, micro innovation. It's things happening within a team. So it's the facilities team saying, hey, we need to do something different about building security. They're going to try something new, good on them. The minute it requires cross-group collaboration, there's a lot of research to indicate that organizational structures are really weak. I didn't mention it before, but not only has everybody been working separately, and there's all these people you don't have reason to have a Zoom call with, you've also got people that have left and new people that have come on. So that means that those established networks have been weakened. So I would probably personally say, and I might feel differently in 6 months, that we can do a lot to create communities of collaborators so they can do it better and broader. But there are completely distributed companies that have been very successful at being collaborative. I just am not sure that it's really happening effectively at a large scale, just more micro. That'd be my best example. Oh, by the way, if you're interested in that, one of the people on the podcast is Dr. Andreas Hofbauer, who is a organizational sociologist. And at the risk of name dropping, if you're familiar with Adam Grant and his podcast, I got a chance to talk with Adam last week. He's one of the people that believes that in terms of career growth, and I'm not just talking about your next promotion, I'm talking about really having somebody build into you, that being co-located is really important. So.
Did he mention the Warby Parker, like I should have invested in that again?
He didn't. I've seen that on one of his videos. He didn't mention that. Actually, he had some wonderful suggestions. One of his suggestions was, we do exit surveys with people when they leave. Everybody's now beginning to repopulate offices. By the way, I believe return to office is a year-long process, not a month-long process. Why don't we do re-entry interviews with them? Ask them, what really went well for you last year? What didn't go so well for you? Did you try something new that worked? What should we try to scale? Who are you most disconnected from? I thought it was brilliant. I actually don't know anybody that's done that except for maybe NASDAQ. Their head of workplace, Steve Todd, is really good. But It was a fun conversation. Yes, sir.
What do research tell about just the effects of working the colo and the hybrid on just how people interact and behave with each other and more
What's the research indicate about how people actually interact with one another, the changing mores, protocols, et cetera? This is my best answer. I don't know that it's a perfect answer. It's very dependent upon work team leaders. And this is one of the things that has got HR leaders rattled, is that they may look across their organization and feel like there isn't one experience happening. There's hundreds, and it's mostly based on the manager. So if the manager feels like presenteeism is the way to measure productivity, they want to see you or know that you're working. Others might be totally different. There is an emerging idea around core working hours that doesn't suggest you only work 4 hours a day, but that ideally there's an overlap to make sure we're all working at certain times of the day together to get past some of this. But I'll tell you, we've been thinking about this a little bit. We have a different podcast from our learning and development team called Leadership by Design. We cut an hour-long podcast just for our own people managers to say, let's think about this a little bit. How are people doing? Is somebody feeling really like their voice isn't being heard, like they've been forgotten in all this? Does it feel like there's cliques forming? If people are starting to populate the office and others less so, are we seeing factions coming around? But I will say, by and large, there's been a lot of empathy, which is really good. You know, I think there's more of an attention now to mental and emotional health because it's rough and people are struggling. So it may be a good thing. I don't know that there's much consistency. If anything, there's concern over such a lack of consistency. And I'm getting that mostly from our Future Forum interviews with executives and employees, but it's a good question. Yeah. Other questions, thoughts? Yes.
What do you see organizations doing to try to rebuild their cultures now that people are coming back into the office?
I'm seeing a lot of interesting experimentation and social, which I think is really good. In fact, I think even here in this room in the last hour, I've heard some examples of what it looks like to try to spark again for people the joy of being together, which I think is far better than saying we expect you to be in the office these days a week. Because if we look at humans seek patterns, it provides us safety and predictability. Leaving the office in a week was very abrupt. And then the months that followed it were really rough. We were cut off from everything. Now, a lot of people feel like they've gotten a little bit of balance and they're maybe a little risk averse. So the best examples I'm seeing are it's a reunion afternoon. We're going to get accounting and finance to have some donuts together because we know you haven't seen each other in a bit. It's, I think, more inventive ways of communicating with employees around their value. I'll tell you, not that we have this nailed, but I think we came upon an important principle where we decided that we just wanted to express to all the employees how important they were to each other. So our policy, we support hybrid. We've encouraged people to spend a couple of days a week in the office. It's not prescriptive, but our message was, like, you're part of the culture. There's a bunch of new people here. There's a bunch of people that feel isolated. Like, just be present enough to invest in others. But it's really early. And if I look at the parts of the world that reopened soonest, it's like a slow, steady growth. Even in places like Singapore, where you'd think that it's more hierarchical, get back in the office. It's just not always happening. Now, if we had 10% unemployment and people felt like they were super concerned about their job security, maybe. But the whole Great Resignation thing is, like I said, it's as much about people pushing back on the traditional work week. So yeah, I'll come around. I'm not going to come around at 8. I'm going to come around at 9. The commute's a lot easier then, or whatever. But it's slow. I think it's going to take us a year. But if you've got examples, we're all ears. That's the number one thing I get asked, by the way. Tell me what other organizations are doing. We hear it. We've done 250 interviews at this point. I don't know that we've gotten great at sharing best practices. Maybe it's because they're still being established. Yeah.
So springboarding off the best practices, are you seeing companies establishing, I don't want to call them rules, but we'll call them rules, like when you're on a call, everybody's on camera, none of this nonsense about having your still photo up there. I mean, what are you seeing in terms of people laying the law down with, if we're going to have this hybrid environment,
Yeah.
at a minimum, these are some things that we're going to adhere to.
Yep. That's a really good question. Yes, we're seeing it once again at a work team level, boss kind of standpoint. But what's happening now is hybrid working guides are starting to really get bigger. And by the way, there is an example of one on the Future Forum website, which is just futureforum.com. Video is an interesting one. We've debated it internally a lot. Our past head of employee engagement suggested video on all the time. I thankfully am given a chance to voice my opinion in terms of some of this stuff. I say that's too much. Like if it's a project team meeting, you don't need video. In fact, I'm not even sure you need a meeting. Maybe you just need an update within a channel. For me, video is best when it's times of social connection. But if it's project team meeting, you're trying to drop off kid at school, you just haven't showered yet today, you really wanted to take a walk during that, I think it's overused a little bit. But to your question of are there policies? Yeah. Once again, though, not super consistent. I think what we will see, and I don't have good data to back this up, is organizations trying to promote more balanced use of communications platforms. So interestingly, one of the best means of communicating that kind of took a hit last year and a half is phone calls. Sometimes it's just nice to call someone. You don't need an hour. For heaven's sakes, if it takes 8 minutes, call them. Talk for 8 minutes. Don't stick them on a meeting for a full hour. And my Herman Miller colleagues might know this, but I have on my calendar every single day 1 hour to walk Griffin, my dog, named after our AHL hockey team. And if somebody schedules a meeting with me for a topic that I've never talked about before, I'll say, I'm holding off on the meeting. I'll call you during this time, or we'll find a time. And I have had, usually it's our salespeople, I've had people that, not you, but I will say, it's like, somebody puts an hour on my calendar to talk about a customer, and I'm like, let me call you. Oh, what are they dealing with? Oh, this is their question? Yeah, I got a great resource. 7 minutes later, we solved it. So I think phone calls, chat, email, video. It was funny, the tech world promised unified communications. What we got was like a million different forms of disconnected communications. I'm really interested in asynchronous messaging as an example, platforms like Yak. Somehow we're going to have to come up with like just some basic ideas. We've done this, by the way. I work for our chief strategy officer. She said to the team this week, if it's urgent, please text, not Teams message. That's just that's not something I check twice a day. If it's something that feels like you want to be able to continue that conversation and add others, I want email. Otherwise, Teams is fine. That was very helpful. We're like, okay. But at scale, no. It's still emerging. Yes. Oh, sorry. Over here. Yes.
Any validity in business leaders wanting their people to be in the office to show the power of the company, but frame it as being culture?
Oh, I think so. Brian Elliott is the founder of Future Forum. He was my guest on one of the podcasts. If you get a second, take a listen to that one. He talks about false flexibility, which is leaders saying one thing and modeling others. And one of the issues is, yes, a desire to say, we're really trying to build our culture, but in fact, there's a fundamental lack of trust. Those are two very different things. And employees will figure it out. Employees will say, I don't think this is about culture. I just don't think they trust me to be working from home this afternoon. So it's an interesting time because of the job market. And because employees feel so disconnected from the entity that is their employer, it's one of the reasons they're so willing to jump, because they might feel connected to 8 people, but they might not be connected with the values anymore. So I think there's a lot of employees out there looking at like, how exactly is my employer going to behave right now? But I've seen the opposite too, actually. So it's a mixed bag, but yeah, that would be my best answer.
VR and metaverse and Facebook and all that. That's got to be at the right here on that scale.
High on the hype cycle, yeah.
What does your research show about that? What is the possibilities? Is that effective productivity?
Don't know if I can answer the question, is it effective productivity? I think VR, as opposed to AR, has shown itself demonstrated very well in certain specific situations, like how do you visualize an entire environment without being in it? My favorite application of VR is technical training. I've seen like these systems engineers allow their technicians to virtually enter into a motor and see, oh, that's how that's connected, because the scale of it's so small and a diagram just doesn't do it. Do I think people will be working that way? No. I remember my first avatar-based workplace experience was maybe 2009, and there's just some things that don't work real well in terms of people's natural desires. So like I remember being at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, when 3D TVs were the promise of a better entertainment experience. And I was like, I don't think people want to wear glasses at home. And we were working with Samsung at the time, actually. We went to Seoul to meet the people in charge of monitors, and they said, you haven't seen 4K and 8K yet. I think they'll ditch the glasses after that. So 3D glasses were a blip. And so many others have been a blip that promise some sort of like, I don't know, simulated reality. AR is interesting. If I have to admit, I'm a little bit more interested in AR because it has the ability to layer the digital onto the physical. I'll never forget when I remember seeing Pokemon Go. There were like these attorneys in downtown Grand Rapids chasing Pokemons in suits around downtown. And I'm like, oh, I guess AR is off the cycle because it feels awfully real. I think AR is, when we've got these actual environments, and we already use it as an example to let people see an Eames lounge chair in their home digitally and stuff. I think there's a lot of promise there too. I'm not really an expert in that area, but I think if it feels weird and you feel kind of stupid, then overcome that. And by the way, I think a VR experience like that you're going to have as soon as I shut up pushes the boundaries of how we think about doing some of this stuff. And it can be something that, if it's understood as part of the work process, can be totally socialized. I've also seen situations where someone's like, let's have a meeting, put this on your face. And it's like, no, I'm not putting that on my face. You got to make it appropriate in the context of, like, we're people, like we're used to being professional, interacting with each other. How's that for an end? Here, stick this on your face. But no, seriously, I think you'll enjoy this as a way of using a technology to completely visualize something that, let's face it, visualization's been a challenge in our industry for 40 years. People can't visualize space. So we should be testing the boundaries on this. Okay, it's Ryan Anderson on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. hermanmiller.com/future work if you want to get up to speed on the videos, the podcast, and all that stuff. But I'll shut up. Have fun.